I was involved in my very first school play. So this was my very first time performing. And how it happened was that this was a school-wide talent show, and each class had to send out a few students, basically. So my teacher just went to class and went, you're going to be in a skit for 10 minutes, so go spend the next 2 weeks preparing. So I believe that we were picked because we were very confident and outgoing, or as my form teacher liked to put it, loud and disruptive. It's about the same thing. So we spent these 2 weeks preparing, and on the day of the performance, I was shaking. I was sweating bullets, right? And I was the first one who I had the very first line. So I had to start us off on the exact right note. So I got up on stage, and the curtains went up, and it was complete silence in the school hall. And this never happens, because I was in a Catholic girls' school. We were always either screaming and shouting or singing school hymns. It was one or the other. Okay. So the curtain went up, I took a deep breath, and I said my first line. And thank God my first line was funny, because the entire audience started laughing, and immediately I could feel the tension draining out of my body. And the next 10 minutes flew by. And by the time the applause started and the curtain started going down, I realized that I was in love with theatre. So that very night, I went to visit my paternal grandfather, and he was this really strict and very intelligent man who was very affectionate towards his grandkids. So when I went into his house, the first thing I did was announce with all the self-importance of my 8 years that I was going to grow up to become an actor. And my grandfather looks at me, he smiles, pinches my cheek, and then turns to my dad and says, "You need to teach her how to say that right." And my dad goes, "Say what right?" "It's pronounced doctor." That should have been my first clue, right? So I'm convinced that if I got a little bit more family support at that point in time, I could have been dominating Hollywood by now. Yeah, so Hollywood is the Tamil version of Bollywood, which is the Hindi version of Hollywood. So this went to waste. But jokes aside, my family was actually really supportive of me doing theatre. And they told me, they said, "Look, you can do theatre as much as you want, your whole life if you want, but you cannot put all your eggs in this particular basket. You have to go get an actual job, and you have to major in something that actually pays the bills." So I majored in communications. Not sure that actually pays the bills, but that's what I did. But theatre remained very much part of my life. From the moment I was 8 years old, I was in drama club all the way through primary school, secondary school, polytechnic, and then when I got to NTU, I minored in drama and performance. So everything that I did, theatre really informed a part of myself. It became a part of my identity, and it taught me lessons that I carry with myself to this day. So, which is why my TED Talk is about why theatre is essential to life. So one of the key things about theatre is that it plants and nurtures seeds of creativity. Now, creativity is a concept people talk about a lot, and our Singapore government especially loves talking about creativity. Especially when they revamped the latest curriculum. They said, when we change this new curriculum, we are really going to instill this sense of creativity in our students. We're going to focus a lot more on the arts. And I love the way they said the word instill, as if it's an injection that you can just put in, and creativity just doesn't work that way. And they like to use the words creativity and arts interchangeably. But it's really not, because arts, in the context of the education system, subjects or activities. But creativity is a mental process and informs everything that you do throughout your entire life. It informs math, science, economics, subjects that traditionally you would think are about logic and critical thinking. But for some reason, we constantly separate them. And the reason for that is because of how our brain is structured. So over here, we have the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain. So the left side of the brain is logic and critical analysis, it's memory. And the right side of the brain tends to be passion, tends to be creativity, tends to be things like music and art. So we think that when we do a certain activity, we're separating our energies in a certain way. There are parts of our brain now to focus on that particular thing. But that's not exactly true. People think that logic and creativity are two separate things, but I don't think so. Let's take a look at these lovely drawings of children, which I found on the internet. So I'm particularly partial to this one because I'm convinced it's done by a Singaporean kid. You will see that it's a tall building. It's got a bunch of windows, confirm HDB. And then you've got the weather, right? It's both hot and rainy. And then you've got the esplanade here, and this is the flower dome at Gardens by the Bay. So I'm pretty sure it's a Singaporean kid. So all these drawings are from different parts of the world, and they're all, you can see, very colorful, very creative. So which part of the brain do you think the kids here are using? If right is passion, left is logic. If you say right, yeah, you're right, but they're also using the left at exactly the same time. Now if you look at all 4 drawings, you'll see there's something very similar. Can you guys spot what that is?
Red roof.
Yes, the red roof, but actually the structure of the houses. Every house looks exactly the same, because the child is taught from a very young age that logically a house has to have a roof that looks a certain way, structure of a house that's square, windows and a door. And that is because they are taught that our world runs on a certain amount of logic, on reasoning, on laws. And they're forced to learn this. And that's not a bad thing, by the way, because we have to learn these laws in order to be able to function in society. We can't draw a house and not expect other people to not be able to identify it. So when they learn these laws, they apply it in their everyday lives. And at the same time, they apply creativity, because that's when you get your different colors, your different elements, all these things that make up a creative and at the same time logical piece of art. So it is exactly the same thing. So people think that logic and creativity are 2 different things, but they're actually best friends. It's just that everybody in the schoolyard keeps saying that they shouldn't be hanging out together. So I have this story of this young boy who grew up in Germany. And when he was a young boy in the 1800s, the late 1800s, he didn't do very well in school. So he basically couldn't even talk until the age of 9. He had trouble verbalizing, and his teachers thought he was mentally retarded. But the thing about this boy is that he was innately curious about the world around him. And as he grew older, he defined his life in the very beginning because of 2 things that happened. He found a compass and a geometry book. And the compass defined his life because he found himself from that moment on completely obsessed with the laws of the universe. He wanted to know how the world worked and why it worked the way it did. And the geometry book led to a lifelong love of math and physics, and he taught himself calculus, which he had mastered by the age of 16. That little boy that everyone thought was actually a retard grew up to be one of the greatest geniuses of our time. He built a lot of our basics of physics. I think you can guess where I'm going with this. This is Albert Einstein. And of his own merit, he said that a lot of his inventions, a lot of his theories were really based on creativity. While you have logic and memory and an understanding of physics, creativity is what helps you push the boundaries. You can understand something fundamentally, but that does not help you expand beyond that. Creativity is what does that, and creativity can feed into things like physics and make it a whole lot better. So when you have an activity like theatre, that really helps you find your footing when it comes to creativity, that helps you think on your feet, helps you push your boundaries. It makes you more efficient every single part of your life, not just when you do arts, not just when you do music, not just when you do theatre, but when you do physics, when you do math, when you do languages. Creativity comes in at every single part of our lives. The next learning point that theatre has is that it teaches you a higher form of empathy. Now, when I say a higher form of empathy, it's because every single one of us are inherently empathetic. We are all born as human beings, really making an effort to understand each other. But when you are an actor, when you are forced to take on another character, you put yourself in someone else's shoes. You literally put on someone else's skin and you walk around in their lives. And that teaches you something that is far more fundamental than what you would understand from interacting with people on a daily basis. One of the most complicated characters I ever had to play was a very, very interesting young woman. Now, this particular play was based on a real-life historical event. It was a double homicide that took place also in the 1800s in America. And this was literally an axe murder that caught the attention of an entire nation. So the whole of America was completely rocked by it because it was such a violent act. And the entire play, the entire event, was basically centered around this woman whose name was Lizzie Borden. Lizzie Borden was not the victim here. She was the murderer. So she was the suspected murderer, and she was suspected of murdering her father and her stepmother very, very violently in the 1800s. So when I was tasked to play this particular role, I was really quite intimidated because I thought to myself, how am I going to empathize with a murderer? How do I do this? So I decided to do some research and find out about her life. And she was really quite interesting because she was born one of two daughters. She had a sister named Emma. She was born to quite a wealthy family actually. Her father today would have been worth about $8 billion. So really quite wealthy. And she and her sister Emma grew up in quite an idyllic household, but when she was fairly young, her mother passed away. And her father remarried. And from all accounts, it seems like the two sisters and the stepmother did not really get along with their stepmother because they felt the stepmother had married their father for his wealth. And that appeared to be true because a few weeks leading up to the murder, the father was actually willing away property to the stepmother's family. So the stepmother's family, her sisters and her brothers, were getting pieces of Lizzie Borden's father's property. So this led to a lot of tension in the household. And on the day of the murder, people said that they actually saw Lizzie Borden in the house. A servant said she'd actually heard Lizzie Borden's laughter on the second floor right after the murder of her stepmother had taken place. So the stepmother was murdered on the second floor, and quite violently. And then a few hours later, when the father came back, he fell asleep on the couch on the first floor, and someone attacked him with an axe while he was asleep. His eyeball was sliced clean in half.
Oh my goodness.
It's a fascinating story, really. And then they started, of course, interrogating everyone in the house, trying to figure out what happened. So Lizzie Borden became the obvious suspect really quickly. A lot of the reason behind it is because her own story was very conflicting. She just kept changing her accounts. And on top of that, the servant, of course, had heard her giggling from the upstairs floor, even though the servant herself changed her account a few days later. And then, on top of that, about 4 days after the murder, a police officer caught Lizzie Borden burning a dress of hers, and Lizzie Borden claimed that it was because she'd gotten paint on the dress. So that wasn't suspect at all. So I was reading about the story, and at this point I'm just scrolling to the end because I'm like, I want to find out how many years this girl spent in jail, right? So I'm scrolling, and then I'm just like, okay, so apparently, after they put her on trial, she got acquitted. She was found not guilty. And I was completely shocked. I was like, how is this possible? How is it possible for someone to find her not guilty? So it was partially put down to police incompetence, though a lot of reports say they don't really believe that's true because at that point in time, police incompetence was pretty widespread. But if they believed you were guilty and you went to jail. But the real reason that Lizzie did not get convicted was because the jury of men did not believe that a woman was capable of such a violent crime. Suckers. I mean, have they never heard of hell hath no fury, right? So Lizzie got away scot-free. So there was this fascinating woman that I had to embody, that I had to deeply empathize with and play her character. And I thought to myself, okay, so she's this rich, white woman who grew up in the 18th century, who's also a murderer. How do I empathize with her? And then I thought to myself, beyond all these things, beyond all these labels, she was a human being, right? She grew up in a time where she felt that she didn't have any place or any rights in the world. And even though things have changed for women a lot in this day and age, the truth is, even women today, we still face milder forms of sexism. For example, women will always, even when women tell other people about their achievements in school or in their career, it will always come second to achievements that are like getting married or getting engaged or having a baby, right? So the power of your mind will always come second to the ability of your womb. And that's something that all women deal with on a regular basis when you're growing up. Even in your 20s or your 30s, one of the first questions people always ask you is, are you married? Do you have a baby? And that's really something that defines you, right? So I could understand that frustration, and I understood her. And the second thing was that Lizzie Borden also lost a parent at a very young age. And when you lose a parent at a really young age, it defines you. It's a course correction. Whatever you were supposed to be from that point in time, from the moment you were born, it changes everything. It shifts your perspective. I was 11 years old when my father passed away, and he passed away quite suddenly. So it was something that completely shifted my life. And so I understood how Lizzie felt. When you can feel so incredibly alone, and as if the entire world is against you. And in just those two moments, I realized that I found Lizzie. In a way that a human being can find another human being, I found a way to connect with her. And that is what theatre teaches you. that as long as you are playing a human being, as long as you are playing someone else, you will find a way to connect with them, because we are all the same. No matter how different our experiences are, no matter how separated we are by time and space, we can find a way to connect. Just ask me and my friend, Lizzie Borden. And that's me playing Lizzie a few years ago. And one of the other major lessons that I learned from theatre is that there are no small parts, only small actors. Now this is a life lesson that I've carried with me my entire life. What this basically means is that no matter what role you are given, no matter how small, no matter how insignificant, play it well. Give it 100% or do not do it at all. When I was a teenager, I got a very small role in a play. I basically had 4 lines. And when I came for rehearsal, I hadn't learned any of them, because I was like, it's 4 lines, do I really need to learn them? Eventually I'll learn it, but the play doesn't depend on me. And my teacher took me aside and told me, he said, look, here's something I need you to remember for the rest of your life. There are no small parts, only small actors. You have to give it your all no matter what you're given. And the thing is, whatever small part you play, it really informs the next part of your life. It will always provide either a stepping stone or a lesson, or basically it will be so bad that it will make you appreciate the next chapter of your life even more. And that's really the basis of it, right? So let's take a look at some people who did some really strange jobs even before they became famous. So we've got Whoopi Goldberg, who was a mortuary beautician and a phone sex operator before she did it. And then we've got Johnny Depp, who was a ballpoint pen salesman. You can imagine that. And then we've got Barack Obama, who was an ice cream scooper at Baskin Robbins. And then you've got Hugh Jackman, who was a gym teacher and a party clown. So as a party clown, he would charge $50 for a visit. So if you get Hugh Jackman to come to your house, $50. And then Ellen DeGeneres was an oyster shucker. And J.K. Rowling. J.K. Rowling said that she was as poor as it was possible to be in modern Britain without being homeless. This was someone who was absolutely nobody before she became somebody. And the thing about theatre is it teaches you grace in the face of adversity. It teaches you that no matter what tiny part you have to play it well. And that's really one of the most important lessons that I have from theatre. The next thing, and the last thing, is that it teaches you how to be larger than life. So theatre, one of the most fundamental things about theatre is that it teaches you how to have a voice. It teaches you how to step forward, to make yourself heard, and to make yourself seen. There was a young boy who grew up in Britain. He was born in 1940, and he had a very loving mother, very kind, and they had a very strong relationship. And his father was someone who was a World War I veteran, so he was in Dunkirk. And when he came back, he had something that we know today as PTSD. So that meant that he didn't deal with adjusting to civilian life very well. In fact, he was quite violent. So every Friday, this little boy, who at that point in time was about 5 or 6 years old, would lie in bed at night and not be asleep because he'd be waiting, shivering, waiting for his drunk father to come back. And when his father came in through the door, he knew the beating would start. First, the father would start with his mother, and then he'd move on to the little boy. And as he grew up, the little boy had a lot of anger towards his father. It was deep-seated. It was something that he himself described as a monster in a cage. It was raw and violent and black. And he once said that if he had had the strength, he would have killed his father for making his mother so upset, so hurt, for putting her in the hospital. He would have done anything to protect his mother. And the anger, the seething anger he had his dad was something that he just couldn't deal with. But when he was about 11 years old, he discovered theatre. And at first, he used it as a means of escape. He used it as a way to step into other people's lives and escape reality just for a little while. But as time wore on, he realized that he couldn't really let himself go in theatre unless he dealt with his emotions. And slowly, by dealing with other characters, he learned how to deal with his anger towards his father. And as he grew up, as he became a prominent figure in society, he began to champion causes like protecting victims of domestic violence. He was a voice for people who didn't have a voice. That man was Patrick Stewart, or as you know him, Professor X. So the thing about theatre is that it gives you something more. And I'm well aware that not everybody loves performing, not everybody loves acting, not everybody wants to be on stage, and that's okay. That's not the point of this. The point of this is that theatre teaches you something more. It gives you confidence, it gives you empathy, and believe me, if you go for a few theatre classes, the lessons that those classes will give you, you will carry with you for the rest of your life. And this is something I can promise you. Before we go, I'd like to leave you with my favorite quote by Oscar Wilde. I regard the theatre as the greatest of all art forms, the most immediate way in which a human being can share with another the sense of what it means to be a human being. Thank you.